No one in Ward Tower could calm the billionaire's daughter, and the cruelest part was that her mother had already spent a fortune trying. By late morning, the lobby of Ward Tower shimmered with polished marble, mirrored pillars, and the kind of quiet wealth that made every footstep sound important. Amelia Ward crossed that floor like a woman who belonged to every inch of it. At 38, the white American billionaire was known for her discipline, her grace under pressure, and the steel beneath her elegance. Her cream blazer was cut to perfection, her brunette hair pinned back with practiced simplicity, and her face, all sharp cheekbones and controlled expression, gave the world exactly what it expected from a woman who had built power out of brilliance. But control was a language grief no longer spoke inside her home. 18 months earlier, her husband had died in a helicopter crash outside Denver, and since then, her 9-year-old daughter Charlotte had carried sorrow like a live wire under her skin. Loud rooms overwhelmed her. Bright lights pressed too hard. Strangers, crowded spaces, sudden changes. All of it could crack open a storm before Amelia even saw it coming. She had hired therapists, grief specialists, private tutors, sensory consultants, and a nanny trained to handle distress. She had rearranged her calendar, redesigned routines, and spent more money than most families would see in a lifetime trying to build safety around one child's broken heart. But grief does not yield to wealth. And on that Tuesday, with 300 donors arriving upstairs for her foundation luncheon, Charlotte's fear chose the worst possible moment to rise. Ethan Cole was pushing his cleaning cart across the west side of the lobby when he heard the first sharp cry. He looked up at once. At 42, Ethan had learned to recognize the difference between noise and pain. He was a white American single dad in a faded blue janitor shirt with a stitched name patch, dark work pants, work boots, and the tired, decent face of a man life had pressed hard without managing to make bitter. His brown hair was cut short. A shadow of stubble marked his jaw. Most executives passed him every day without really seeing him, but invisibility had never offended Ethan the way helplessness did. 3 years earlier, cancer had taken his wife, and since then he had been raising his daughter Ellie alone in a small rental on the edge of town. Ellie was 9 too. Ellie also knew what grief could do to a child's nervous system. Some days school hallways felt too loud. Some days alarms, crowds, and sudden voices made the world come in too fast. Ethan had learned not to meet that fear with force. He met it by lowering himself, by softening his voice, by giving a frightened child something small enough to hold until the world felt human again. Now, in the center of the lobby, Charlotte Ward was unraveling in front of security guards, assistants, and a child specialist who kept repeating the wrong kind of calm. Amelia was kneeling near her daughter in expensive heels, trying to reach her without making the crowd worse. And for the first time that morning, the famous composure in her face was gone. Charlotte was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Her hands were over her ears. The chandelier light hit the marble in hard white pools. Elevator chimes kept sounding. Shoes clicked. Voices layered. Everything was too much. Ethan did not think long. He set his spray bottle down on the cart, reached for an old cleaning checklist from the side pocket, and folded it once, then again, then again. A paper star. He approached slowly, stopping far enough away not to startle the child and close enough for his voice to land. Amelia looked up, alarmed at first, then confused. Ethan lowered himself to one knee. "Hey," he said softly, not to Amelia, but to Charlotte. "You don't have to be brave all at once." The girl's crying hitched. Ethan kept his eyes gentle and his movements small. "This room feels too loud, doesn't it?" Charlotte did not answer, but one trembling hand eased slightly away from her ear. Ethan held out the folded star in his open palm. "When my daughter has hard days, we count things that stay still. Want to start with the lights?" Charlotte blinked through tears. Amelia went motionless. Around them, the lobby slowly hushed, as if even wealth itself knew not to interrupt. Ethan counted the first light softly, then the second, then the third. Charlotte's breathing began to follow him. He placed the paper star in her hand, and for the first time since the panic began, she stopped screaming. When she finally looked up at him, her voice was small and cracked. "You made that." Ethan gave her the faintest smile. "A long time ago," he said gently. "My daughter used to ask for one every hard day." And in that stunned, shining lobby, while Amelia Ward stared at the janitor no one had ever noticed, her little girl went quiet for him in a way she had not gone quiet for anyone in months. The little girl had stopped screaming, but no one in the marble lobby understood why she had gone quiet for a janitor with calloused hands and a plastic ring of maintenance keys. Ethan Cole did not ask for their attention. He only knelt on the polished floor beside the billionaire's daughter and held out a small paper star he had folded from an old cleaning checklist. "You made that," the girl whispered, her breath still shaky from tears. "A long time ago," Ethan said gently. "My daughter used to ask for one every hard day." The child looked at the star, then at him, and something inside the room shifted. The noise of expensive shoes, elevator chimes, and hushed executive panic faded into a strange stillness. Amelia Ward stood 10 feet away, motionless in a cream blazer that probably cost more than Ethan earned in a month. Yet in that moment, she looked less like a billionaire and more like a frightened mother who had run out of answers. Her daughter, Charlotte, had melted down in the middle of Ward Tower's annual foundation luncheon, right there beneath a chandelier the size of a pickup truck. Assistants had tried. Security had tried. A private nanny had tried. Even the child psychologist Amelia, kept on retainer, had spoken softly into the storm and gotten nowhere. But Ethan had done what powerful people often forget to do. He had lowered himself. He had become quiet enough to be safe. "Can I sit with you?" Charlotte asked, clutching the paper star like it was something breakable and holy. Ethan nodded once. "You sure can." She moved. Closer, not into his arms, but near enough to lean her shoulder against his sleeve. That small gesture landed harder than any speech. Amelia's throat tightened. She had spent years building companies, closing acquisitions, rescuing failing markets, and turning risk into an empire. Yet the one heart she wanted most to protect still lived behind doors she could not always open. Charlotte had not been the same since her father died 18 months earlier in a helicopter crash outside Denver. Since then, crowds were hard. Sudden noise was harder. Bright rooms, strangers, hands reaching too fast, voices saying calm down when nothing inside her felt calm. All of it could send her spiraling. Amelia had thrown money at the pain because money was the one language the world had always answered. Specialists, retreats, tutors, private schools, security teams trained in de-escalation. But grief was not impressed by wealth. And now here was a janitor in a faded blue work shirt with a stitched name patch and a tired face, reaching her daughter in less than 2 minutes with a folded paper star and a voice soft enough to land. "What did you say to her?" Amelia asked at last, almost afraid to break the spell. Ethan looked up, then rose slowly so he would not startle Charlotte. "Nothing special, ma'am. I watched 5 trained adults fail." Her voice stayed composed, but the strain beneath it showed. "You said something." Ethan glanced toward Charlotte, who was tracing the creases of the star with careful fingers. "I told her the room felt too loud. I told her she didn't have to be brave all at once. Then I asked if she wanted me to count the lights with her." Amelia stared at him. Count the lights. Not correct her. Not overpower her. Not perform expertise. Just meet her where she was. "How did you know what to do?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, and for a second the lobby lights caught the grief that lived behind his calm. "Because my little girl used to feel that way after her mom passed," he said. "Some days the world hits a child all at once." Amelia's expression changed then. It softened. The steel did not disappear, but something human moved beneath it, something bruised and newly awake. Across the lobby, a vice president whispered that the guests were waiting upstairs. Another executive checked his watch. No one dared interrupt. Charlotte looked up at Ethan again. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" she asked. Ethan swallowed before answering. "Yes, sweetheart. I'll still be here." And though no one in that glittering building knew it yet, that simple promise was the first thread in a story that was about to pull 2 wounded lives into the same quiet light. Amelia Ward had negotiated hostile mergers, stared down senators, and buried a husband without letting the cameras see her break. But asking a janitor for help with her daughter felt strangely harder than all of it. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice low enough not to disturb Charlotte, "would you walk with us upstairs?" Ethan instinctively glanced at the yellow caution card he had left near the west elevator, the spray bottle still clipped to the side, the mop handle leaning like a flag of a life no one important ever noticed. "I'm on shift, ma'am." Amelia's assistant stepped in at once. "We can find someone to cover the floor." Ethan almost said no. Men in his position learned to say no carefully, and yes, even more carefully. Too much willingness looked suspicious. Too much dignity looked defiant. But Charlotte was already on her feet, one small hand wrapped around the paper star, the other hovering uncertainly near his sleeve. "Please," she whispered. Ethan looked at her and saw not a billionaire's daughter, not a child in designer shoes under crystal lights, but a grieving little girl trying to hold herself together in a room built for adults who never had to ask twice. "All right," he said gently. "I'll walk with you." The private family lounge on the 32nd floor was quieter than the lobby, but no warmer. Everything in it was expensive, carefully curated, and emotionally untouched: cream walls, abstract art, low Italian sofas no child would ever choose, and windows so tall the whole city looked like a board game spread beneath the glass. Charlotte stopped in the doorway, suddenly hesitant again. Ethan did not rush her. "How about we count something smaller this time?" he said. "Too many windows up here." She looked around. Books. Good choice. They moved to a built-in shelf lined with hardcovers, chosen more for color than comfort. Charlotte counted under her breath, one hand still clutching the paper star, and Ethan stood nearby with the same quiet patience he used on difficult mornings when his own daughter could not find the courage to leave the house. Amelia watched from across the room, her arms folded tight, as if loosening them might let the whole ache spill out. "You really have a daughter?" she asked after a long silence. Ethan nodded. "Her name's Ellie. She's 9. Amelia's gaze shifted, softer now. "Same age as Charlotte." "Yes, ma'am." "And she struggled after her mother passed?" Ethan took a breath. For a while she stopped talking much at school. Loud places were the worst. Fire drills, assemblies, even birthday parties. Grief doesn't always look like sadness on kids. Sometimes it looks like fear. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it just looks like too much. Amelia lowered her eyes. No consultant had ever said it to her that plainly. Not too clinical, not too polished, just true. From the hallway came the muffled pulse of the luncheon recovering without them. Forks against china, practiced laughter, the sound of wealth continuing on schedule. Amelia gave a humorless smile. 300 guests upstairs, half of them asking for my time, the other half asking for my money. And the only person who helped my daughter today was the man cleaning the lobby. Ethan shifted, uncomfortable with praise. "Kids don't care about titles." "No," Amelia said quietly. "Only adults do." Charlotte turned from the bookshelf then and walked back toward them. Calmer now. Color returned to her face. "There are 42 books," she said. Ethan smiled. 42's a strong number. She looked up at him with a seriousness that did not belong on a child. "Will you come back tomorrow if it gets loud again?" Before Ethan could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. One glance at the cracked screen tightened his chest. It was the school nurse. "Ellie." He did not move at first, but Amelia saw the change in his eyes. And in that instant, without knowing it, the billionaire finally stepped into the real life of the man who had just brought peace to hers. The phone buzzed again in Ethan's hand, not loud, not dramatic, but enough to turn the air inside the 32nd floor lounge suddenly thin. He stepped back on instinct, the old habit of a man who never wanted his personal troubles to stain someone else's polished space. "I'm sorry," he said, glancing at Amelia before answering. "I need to take this." Amelia gave a small nod, and for the first time that day there was no executive sharpness in it, only recognition. Ethan turned slightly toward the window and lifted the phone to his ear. "This is Ethan Cole." The school nurse's voice came gentle but brisk, the voice of someone trying not to alarm a parent while already knowing a parent would worry anyway. "Mr. Cole, this is Nurse Ramirez at Willow Creek Elementary. Ellie's okay, but she had a rough moment after lunch. Too much noise in the cafeteria, then the fire alarm test caught her off guard. She's calmed down now, but she keeps asking if you can come." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. In his mind, he could already see Ellie exactly as she would be, small shoulders drawn tight, backpack clutched to her chest, trying hard not to cry because she knew how tired he looked by the end of every shift. "Did she have a panic spell?" he asked quietly. "A mild one," Nurse Ramirez said. "No injury. She just needs familiar ground." Familiar ground. That was what children called love before they had the words for it. Ethan looked across the room at Charlotte, now curled into the corner of the sofa with the paper star in both hands. Calmer, but still fragile in that careful way grieving children often were. He thought of Ellie at her little desk in the nurse's office, probably staring at the floor tiles and counting them one by one the way they had practiced on difficult days. He had taught her that after the funeral. Count the tiles. Count your breaths. Count what stays. I'm on my way, he said. When he lowered the phone, Amelia was already watching him. Your daughter, she said softly. Ethan nodded. School nurse. Loud day. Alarm test. He slipped the phone back into his pocket with more care than the cracked case deserved. I need to pick her up. Charlotte looked up at that, her expression changing with the solemn alertness children carry when they hear another child is hurting. Is she scared? She asked. Ethan turned toward her and kept his voice warm. A little, but she's strong. Charlotte looked down at the star. I was scared too. I know, Ethan said. Amelia uncrossed her arms and stepped forward, not as a billionaire now, not as the woman whose name sat on the side of the building, but as a mother standing in the truth of another parent's hard day. Go get her, she said. I'll have a driver take you. Ethan gave the smallest shake of his head. That's kind, but I've got my truck. Amelia studied him for a moment, noticing the reflexive pride in that answer, the dignity of a man who had very little and still tried not to owe the world more than he must. Then at least let me tell downstairs you're leaving early. He hesitated. Janitors did not leave early from places like this without paperwork, permission, or consequence. Amelia seemed to read the thought before he spoke it. No one will dock your pay, Mr. Cole. The room fell quiet after that. Somewhere beyond the sealed glass, the city kept moving, cabs threading the avenues, sirens fading in the distance, sunlight sliding down mirrored towers. Inside, two mothers existed in absence. One gone from Ethan's life for 3 years now after cancer had taken her in a hospice room that smelled like bleach and lavender lotion. The other gone from Charlotte's world in a different way. A father vanished into the sky and never returned. Grief had given these children different storms, but storms all the same. Ethan bent slightly toward Charlotte before leaving. You keep that star safe for me, okay? She nodded with unusual seriousness. I will. Then, after a pause, maybe your daughter would like one too. Something in Ethan's face softened. She would. Amelia walked him to the private elevator herself, ignoring the stunned glances of assistants in the hallway. At the door she stopped, then asked the question that had been forming since. The lobby. Mr. Cole, would it upset Ellie if Charlotte met her someday? Ethan looked at her, surprised not by the offer, but by the humility in it. Down below, his old pickup was waiting in the employee lot. Across town, his daughter was waiting in the nurse's office, doing her best to be brave on borrowed strength. And somewhere between those two worlds, something unexpected had begun. No, he said at last. I think she'd understand. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and as Ethan stepped inside, neither of them yet realized that the next time their children met, it would change far more than a difficult afternoon. By the time Ethan Cole's pickup rolled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Elementary, the late afternoon sun had turned the brick school walls the color of warm rust, and the wind carried the dry scent of cut grass and asphalt. He parked crooked in his haste, killed the engine, and sat for one brief second with both hands on the wheel, breathing once before stepping back into the part of life that mattered most. Inside, the front office buzzed softly with copier noise, distant classroom chatter, and the squeak of rubber soles on wax tile. Nurse Ramirez looked up the moment he entered. She's in here, she said gently, her voice already lowered in the way adults do when a child's nervous system has had enough of the world for one day. Ethan thanked her and stepped into the small nurse's room where Ellie sat on the edge of a narrow cot, backpack in her lap, fingers looped tightly through the straps. Her face was pale, but not panicked now, just tired. 9 years old and already carrying herself with that careful, quiet children learn when they do not want to be one more burden on a parent who is already carrying too much. Hey, Bug, Ethan said softly. Ellie looked up, and the moment she saw him, her shoulders dropped a fraction. I tried to stay in class, she murmured. I know you did. He crouched in front of her, not touching her right away, giving her room the way he had learned after too many hard afternoons and tearful nights. The alarm was loud. She nodded, and then everyone laughed because I covered my ears before it even started. Ethan felt something hot and old move through his chest. Not rage exactly, But that helpless ache decent fathers know when they cannot protect their child from the casual cruelty of ordinary places. Kids don't always understand what fear looks like, he said. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Ellie stared at the floor. Did I mess up your job? There it was. The question beneath every question. Ethan reached out then and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. No, sweetheart. You are never the problem I have to solve. You're my daughter. You're the reason I keep showing up. Her eyes watered, but she blinked the tears back with the same stubborn courage her mother used to wear when chemo took everything except grace. Ethan sat beside her on the cot, shoulder to shoulder, until her breathing slowed into something steadier. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper star, a little wrinkled from the day, but still holding its shape. I was going to make you one tonight, he said, but I think maybe you need it now. Ellie took it carefully, almost reverently. You made this at work? Yeah. For me. He smiled. Always. She turned the star over in her hands, tracing the folds. It's nice. Ethan hesitated, then added, another little girl liked one today too. Ellie looked up, curious despite herself. From your building? Was she scared? Ethan nodded. Very. Ellie considered that with the solemn wisdom grief sometimes teaches too early. Did the star help? A little, he said. But mostly I think being understood helped. They left the school a few minutes later, moving slowly through the front office and out into the slanting gold light. On the drive home, Ellie sat in the passenger seat with the paper star in her lap, and the window cracked just enough to let in the sound of the world without forcing too much of it on her. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and the other relaxed between them, available if she needed it. Halfway to their small rental on the edge of town, his phone lit up at a red light. A message from an unknown number. This is Amelia Ward. Charlotte asked if your daughter is feeling better. Ethan looked at the screen, then at Ellie beside him, quiet but calmer now. And for the first time all day the two halves of his life no longer felt separated by class, glass, and steel. They were beginning, somehow, to speak to each other. He typed back with his thumb. She's okay. Thank you for asking. A second later, another message appeared. Charlotte would like to send her something. Ethan stared at the words while the light turned green, and though he did not know it yet, that simple text was about to open a door neither family had expected. That evening, the Cole house settled into its usual gentle quiet, the kind built not from peace exactly, but from practice. Their small rental sat at the end of a narrow street where the porch lights came on early and the neighbors knew just enough about one another to wave without asking too many questions. Inside, the air carried the familiar scent of tomato soup and grilled cheese. Simple comfort Ethan could make half asleep, the kind of meal that asked nothing from a tired child except to sit down and be warm. Ellie had changed into soft flannel pajama pants and one of her mother's old oversized t-shirts, the hem nearly to her knees. She sat cross-legged on the couch with the paper star beside her and a blanket tucked around her legs while Ethan moved between the tiny kitchen and the living room, keeping the rhythm of the evening steady on purpose. Children who had been frightened by the world all day needed predictability the way plants needed light. Soup's ready, he called softly. Ellie looked up from the coloring book in her lap. Can we eat in here? Tonight we can. He brought the bowls over on a chipped plastic tray and set them on the coffee table. For a few minutes, nothing important happened. Spoons clinked. The old refrigerator hummed. A pickup truck rolled past outside with country radio leaking through the open window. It was ordinary, and that was its own kind of mercy. Then Ethan's phone buzzed again on the armrest. Ellie glanced at it. Is it work? No, he said, picking it up. The message was from Amelia Ward. Charlotte drew this for Ellie. If it's all right, I can have someone. Drop it off tonight or bring it tomorrow. A second image followed before Ethan could answer. It was a photograph of a child's drawing on thick white paper. Two girls stood beneath a yellow sun that took up half the page. One was labeled Charlotte in careful, uneven letters. The other simply said new friend. Above them floated a crooked paper star with 5 exaggerated points. Ethan stared longer than he meant to. For all the size of Ward Tower and all the distance between their lives, grief had a way of reducing the world to gestures small enough to fit in a child's hand. What is it? Ellie asked. Ethan turned the phone so she could see. Her eyes moved over the drawing, cautious at first, then softer. She made that. Looks like she did. Ellie set her spoon down. For me. For you. She did not smile right away. Children like Ellie were careful with hope. They approached kindness the way people approached skittish animals, slowly, without assuming it would stay. You can tell her thank you, she said quietly. And that I like the star. Ethan typed back, fingers slower than usual. Tomorrow would be better. Ellie says thank you. A reply came almost at once. Charlotte wants to know if Ellie likes books about horses. Ethan let out the smallest surprised laugh. What? Ellie asked. Charlotte wants to know if you like horse books. Ellie's expression changed, just a little, but enough. I do. Any particular kind? She thought for a second. The ones where the horse is scared at first, then trusts somebody. Ethan felt that one in his chest. He sent the answer. A minute later, another message arrived. Then I think they may have something in common. Before Ethan could decide what to make of that, headlights swept briefly across the front window. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a sleek black car slowing at the curb in front of a house that had never seen one like it. Ellie turned toward the window. Ethan stood very still. And in the hush of that modest living room, both of them felt it at once. The outside world had just arrived at their door. The black sedan idled at the curb with the kind of quiet confidence money buys, its polished body catching the glow of the street lamp outside Ethan Cole's small rental. For a second, no one inside moved. Ellie sat very still on the couch, one hand resting on the paper star Charlotte had unknowingly mirrored with her drawing, while Ethan stood between the coffee table and the front window, his phone still in his hand, his instincts pulling in two directions at once. One part of him was the father who protected his home like sacred ground. The other was the man who understood that sometimes kindness arrived wearing clothes from a world far outside your own. Are you expecting somebody? Ellie asked softly. Ethan looked through the curtain first, not from fear exactly, but from habit. Years of living modestly had taught him that surprises were rarely free. Outside, a driver in a dark suit stepped out from the front seat and moved to the rear passenger door. A moment later, Amelia Ward emerged, elegant even in the fading evening light, though less formal than she had been at the tower. Her hair was pulled back more loosely now. Her coat was simple, camel-colored, expensive but understated. Beside her, holding a flat gift bag in both hands like something important, stood Charlotte. The little girl's posture was uncertain, but she was not melting down. She was trying. Ethan let the curtain fall back into place. It's Charlotte and her mom, he said. Ellie blinked, surprised enough to sit straighter. Here. Looks that way. He studied her face before moving. You okay if I open the door? Ellie looked down at the drawing on the phone screen, then at her own paper star on the couch cushion. For a child who had learned caution young, this was no small question. But after a moment, she nodded. Only if they're nice. Ethan's mouth softened into the faintest smile. That's a fair rule. He crossed the room, passing the shelf where a framed photo of his late wife still stood between a thrift store lamp and a stack of library books. The porch boards creaked under his boots as he stepped outside. Amelia turned toward him at once. Mr. Cole, I'm sorry to come by unannounced. Her voice was quieter than it had been in the office tower, stripped of boardroom cadence and public polish. Charlotte didn't want to wait until tomorrow. Charlotte held up the gift bag slightly, her fingers tightening around the paper handles. I made something, she said. Ethan looked from mother to daughter, then back toward the warm yellow glow inside his living room window. You didn't have to do that. Amelia gave a tired smile that held more humility than wealth. I know. But I'm learning that children sometimes understand urgency better than adults do. That landed because it was true. Ethan stepped aside and opened the screen door wider. You can come in for a minute. The house felt even smaller once they entered, but not in a shameful way. Just honest. The sofa had one arm patched neatly with fabric that almost matched. The kitchen counters were clean but worn. A second-hand bookshelf leaned slightly to the left beneath the weight of paperback novels and school binders. Amelia noticed all of it, but to her credit, she noticed without pity. Charlotte noticed only Ellie. The two girls stared at each other for a beat that felt fragile enough to break. Then Charlotte walked forward slowly and held out the bag. These are for you, she said. Ellie accepted it with the solemn care children use when something matters more than they know how to say. Inside was the drawing from the photo, now tucked between sheets of tissue paper, along with a slim hardcover book about a frightened rescue horse that learns to trust again, and beneath that, a packet of metallic origami paper in silver and pale blue. Ellie's fingers hovered over the stack. You brought all this. Charlotte nodded. The horse book was my idea. The paper was Mom's. Amelia lifted one shoulder lightly. I was told stars are important. Something shifted then, small but real. Ellie looked up at Charlotte, then at the horse book again. Thank you, she whispered. Charlotte glanced at Ethan as if asking whether she had done it right. Ethan gave the slightest nod. Ellie sat down on the rug with the book in her lap, and after half a second of hesitation, Charlotte lowered herself beside her. Two girls. One rug. One paper star already on the couch, another story beginning on the floor. Amelia remained standing near the doorway to the living room, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands in a place where nothing glittered and everything meant something. Ethan noticed. Can I get you coffee? He asked. Amelia looked at him, then around at the ordinary grace of his home, and for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire said, yes, like someone grateful, not powerful. And while the kettle began to warm in the little kitchen and the girls turned the first page of the horse book together, the distance between Ward Tower and this rented house grew quietly smaller than either parent had thought possible. The kettle gave a soft rattle on Ethan Cole's stovetop, a modest sound in a modest house, but in that moment it felt like the only safe noise in the room. Amelia Ward stood near the entrance to the living room with her hands loosely folded, watching her daughter sit cross-legged beside Ellie on the worn area rug. The girls had opened the horse book together, their shoulders not quite touching, but close enough to suggest the possibility of ease. Charlotte pointed at one of the illustrations, a skittish mare standing at the edge of a fence line, while a little girl waited a few feet away with an apple in her hand. She doesn't trust people yet, Charlotte said quietly. Ellie looked down at the picture, then nodded. Maybe she got scared too many times. Maybe, Charlotte agreed. Children who have known grief recognize its language even when no one names it. Ethan moved carefully in the kitchen, spooning instant coffee into two mismatched mugs, giving the room space to become whatever it was trying to become. Amelia watched him for a moment before speaking. You keep things very calm here. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. We try. He filled the mugs with hot water, and steam rose between them like something honest. Ellie does better when she knows what the evening will feel like before it happens. Amelia gave a faint smile, though sadness sat just behind it. Charlotte used to be like that with her father. He traveled constantly, but every Sunday morning he made pancakes in the shape of animals. It was ridiculous. None of them looked like animals. But she knew what Sunday felt like. Her voice stayed composed until the last few words, then softened in spite of her. Ethan handed her a mug, and their fingers almost touched. After my wife died, I stopped knowing what most days were supposed to feel like, he said. So I started making little rules. Soup on rough days. Library on Saturdays. Paper stars when Ellie can't settle her thoughts. Amelia wrapped both hands around the mug. It was too ordinary to belong in her world, and somehow that made it precious. I built a company by controlling variables, she said, looking toward the girls. Then grief walked in and ignored every rule I knew. Ethan leaned one shoulder against the kitchen counter. That's because grief isn't disorder. It's love with nowhere to go for a while. Amelia looked at him then, really looked, and the words seemed to land somewhere deep, somewhere polished language and expensive therapy had circled without reaching. In the living room, Ellie had opened the packet of origami paper and was running one finger along the metallic edges. Charlotte watched with bright attention. Can your dad make more stars? She asked. Ellie nodded. He can make birds too. And little boxes. Charlotte turned toward Ethan. Can he show us? The question carried no entitlement, only hope. Ethan set his mug down and came around the coffee table, lowering himself to the rug with the ease of a man long used to meeting children at eye level. All right, he said, but only if both of you are patient. Good folding takes quiet hands. Charlotte immediately placed her palms in her lap. Ellie mirrored her without thinking. Amelia stood frozen for a second, struck by the sight of her daughter following someone else's calm without resistance, without fear. Ethan chose a sheet of silver paper and began. Fold corner to corner. Smooth the line. Turn it once. Then again. His voice never rose above what was needed. The girls followed closely, their small hands clumsy at first, then steadier. Outside, a dog barked down the block. A porch light flicked on across the street. In the Cole house, time slowed to the gentle discipline of creating something fragile and giving it shape. When Charlotte's first star collapsed in on itself, she looked distressed, but Ellie surprised them both by speaking first. "That's okay," she said. "Mine looked weird the first time, too." Charlotte stared at her. "Really?" Ellie nodded. "Dad says not every fold has to be perfect to hold." Ethan felt that one in his chest because it was something his wife used to say, and hearing their daughter pass it forward made the room briefly ache with grace. Amelia looked down into her mug so no one would see her eyes shine. By the time the second stars were finished, one silver and one pale blue, the girls were sitting closer than before, comparing points and laughing softly over whose looked lopsided. Ethan rose to gather the extra paper, and Amelia stepped nearer to the rug at last. Charlotte looked up at her mother and then back at Ellie. "Can she come to my house sometime?" she asked. It was such a simple question, but it landed with the weight of permission, future, and trust. Amelia met Ethan's eyes across the room, and neither of them answered right away, because they both understood that some doors, once opened by kindness, do not close the same way again. Amelia did not answer Charlotte's question that night with the speed of a woman used to giving orders and being obeyed. Instead, she looked at Ethan, then at the two girls on the rug, their paper stars resting in their laps like tiny proofs that fragile things could still hold shape, and she chose honesty over polish. "If Ellie would like that," she said gently, "then I think we'd both be very happy." Ellie glanced up at her father first, the way children do when they are still learning whether good things are safe to trust. Ethan saw the question in her eyes and gave her the answer he had always tried to give, not with pressure, not with fear, but with presence. "Only when you're ready, Bug," he said. Ellie nodded once, careful and brave in that quiet way that had come to define her. "Maybe," she whispered. Charlotte smiled as if maybe was more than enough. A little later, after the mugs had gone empty and the extra origami paper had been stacked neatly back into the gift bag, Amelia rose to leave. She thanked Ethan with a seriousness that made the simple words feel earned. At the door, Charlotte turned back and held up her silver star. "I'm keeping this by my bed," she announced. Ellie looked down at her own pale blue one and said, almost shyly, "Me too." The mothers were absent in different ways, the fathers lost in different ways, but somehow two girls had found a bridge made of paper, patience, and being understood. On the porch, the night air had cooled. The sedan waited at the curb, still elegant, still out of place on that small street, but less foreign now. Amelia paused before stepping down. "Mr. Cole," she said, and then corrected herself with a softness Ethan had not expected from her the first time they met beneath the chandeliers of Ward Tower. "Ethan, thank you for today. For Charlotte. For me too, I think." Ethan stood beneath the porch light, one hand resting lightly on the screen door. "Kids don't need perfect people," he said. "They just need someone who comes back." Amelia held his gaze for a second, and in that silence the truth of her own life seemed to settle around her. Money had built walls. Influence had opened doors. Success had answered every practical problem put in front of her. But none of it had calmed her daughter the way one quiet man had, because what Charlotte had needed was never luxury. It was safety. It was gentleness. It was someone willing to kneel instead of tower. After they drove away, the street returned to its ordinary hush. Ethan locked the door, turned off the porch light, and found Ellie already curled on the couch with the horse book open against her knees. He sat beside her, and without a word she leaned into him, small and warm and finally at ease. That was the thing about fatherhood, he thought. No matter what the world asked of him, no matter how strange the day became, no matter how many rich buildings, difficult memories, or unexpected miracles stood between morning and night, he always returned to this. To his daughter, to the quiet duty of showing up, to the sacred work of being there. He brushed a hand over her hair, and Ellie held up her paper star without looking away from the page. "Dad, yeah, Bug. I think Charlotte was scared like me." Ethan nodded. "I think so too." Ellie rested her head against his arm. "Then I'm glad you stayed with her." The words settled deep because they were simple and true and bigger than the room they were spoken in. He had stayed with Charlotte, and now he was home, staying with Ellie. Perhaps that was the whole story in the end. Not a billionaire, not a tower, not a black sedan at the curb. Just this: when pain made children feel lost, love came back for them. again and again. In paper stars, in soup on hard days, in a father's steady voice, in a mother brave enough to admit she needed help. Upstairs in a glass tower and down here in a rented house. Healing had begun the same way it always does, quietly. One act of grace, one honest moment, one child feeling safe enough to breathe. And maybe that is what dignity really looks like. Not power, not applause, just the courage to be kind when no one has to be. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe and stay with us for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that still heals. And before you go, tell us this in the comments. Have you ever seen one small act of kindness change someone's whole world?